Alright everyone, there's a 40-mile-long Russian armored convoy headed for Kyiv right now. What does that mean for the Ukrainian army's defense? It's upside down.
How am I supposed to cope with Putin's threat of nuclear war if all the vodka's being pulled off the shelves?
And where do I go to pick up my towed Russian tank? Hello Spare Parts Army, I'm your average infantryman Chris Cappy. Today I'm continuing our ground level analysis of the Russo-Ukrainian war, now in its 7th day. Open source intelligence networks on Twitter were able to intercept these low-level Russian unit communications, which weren't even encrypted, so anyone with a radio could listen in or jam their signal in the middle of combat. Communications that have been translated reveal Russian soldiers' call signs as they curse each other in the middle of combat, they're angry over the lack of supplies, and we have reports of their KIA and injuries, all from listening in on their communications.
Here you see the Russian infantry using a tactic called recon by fire, where they just go down the road shooting everything in sight.
So I guess it's a good thing that I went ahead and changed the password to the channel 3 times yesterday to protect from Russian cyber attacks. One Reddit user pointed out that the Russian invasion so far has been like Putin's version of Firefest, a huge disaster. But a lot of people are getting their analysis from Western generals, who look at all the Russian casualties and they think that's a sign that they're losing. A lot of people don't understand the Russian military though, and I've been studying it for years now. Historically, the Russian army has always been more comfortable with taking high levels of casualties. You look at the Georgian battle, you look at Granzi, they always take higher casualties. We would assume Putin and Russian generals would be horrified by, like we would, but that's not the case. The fact is the Russian army has viewed war very differently. And there's a chance that the Russian army did what the old Soviet Union army used to do, and they sent in their conscripts and their worst equipment first.
Captured Russian POWs confirm that they had no idea they were going into a war. They thought they were going into a training event. But to be fair, this could just be Ukrainian propaganda. Or it could be what the Russian military told their soldiers to say in the event of being captured.
But is that the reality on the ground? Or are there parts of this story that the media is missing here? Let's look at the open source intelligence tool, the live conflict map, where the marked red areas show us live, up-to-the-minute visualizations of all the areas that are completely in Russian army control. This area here has grown slightly since Sunday, where they started to try to flank the city from the west, down to the south, to the city of Kyiv, which was in Russian control as early as last night, but as of today, the Ukrainian armed forces have recaptured it. According to the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense analysis, they're predicting that the Russian troop movements over the next few days are going to look like this, where the Russian army is going to try to move from the east to the west to Kyiv, and from the south all the way to the north to Kyiv. The new 40-mile-long Russian convoy has now reached about 30 kilometers outside of Kyiv, near a town called Encirclement, which is a choke point on the way down to the capital. This town has seen heavy fighting in the past few days. Matthew Bolig is an expert in Russian warfare at the Chatham House, a policy institute in London, and he said, quote, "What we're seeing is basically phase 2, which is a shift to the much more brutal, tactless, unrestricted warfare, which will lead to many more civilian casualties and bloodier battles." The convoy is made up of BMP-3s, the Russian army's most advanced tracked infantry fighting vehicle. Each one carries 8 infantry, which can dismount once they reach urban areas. These vehicles fire a 30mm autocannon, which are massive explosive bullets. It's estimated there are 15,000 additional Russian troops in total in this convoy headed to the capital. There are also hundreds of Ural supply trucks carrying food, fuel, and ammo. I heard a lot of misconceptions in the media around this movement. In order to really understand what this long Russian convoy is actually doing here, we need to turn to a 416-page paper written in 2017 by Dr. Lester W. Grew called The Russian Way of War. It's an exhaustive breakdown of modern Russian army tactics and doctrine. In the section on Russian logistics, it points out that the Russian military will aim to set up refueling points along the route ahead of time, which is what I think they've been doing over the past 6 days in the initial invasion movement. According to the refueling standards, Russian tanks need to stop during the second half of a 12-hour-long march day. I believe this explains the periodic slowdowns and the stops along the convoy route. So the media is saying that the convoy is going slower than expected. They flat out do not understand convoy operations of this size, and they've never had to coordinate something at this scale before.
For instance, they've probably never had the pleasure of having to go out into the freezing cold wood line on a tactical pause and take a tactical piss, like this guy had to.
If the initial intelligence reports here are accurate, if you were to walk from one end of this convoy to the other end at an average walking pace of 18 minutes per mile, that would take you 12 hours to walk from one end of the convoy to the other. That's a lot of tanks. By the book, the max range of a Russian Material Technical Support Battalion, MTO Support Battalion, is 80 kilometers. When you look at the map, they've gone slightly further than that, which explains some of the slowdown that they're operating just outside their max limitations of fuel and equipment. We have to understand that the Russian army doesn't have their headquarters right on the border of Belarus and Ukraine. They have it some 50 kilometers to the rear of the border. So they're traveling at least 150 kilometers total to their staging area for the assault on Kyiv. So by the Russian army doctrine, by the book, the brigade assault element gets close to the objective that they plan on attacking, in this case Kyiv, and then what they do is they set up a designated safe distance at the edge of the enemy's defenses. We see on the live Ukraine conflict map, liveua.com, the Russians are currently 15 kilometers outside Kyiv, where they are clearly setting up an assembly area, after which they will conduct a line of attack on the city. To be sure, they have faced heavier resistance than they expected from the Ukrainian armed forces, who are putting up a hell of a fight, and it's my hope that they will prevail. But I want to remain realistic about our expectations here. To the untrained eye, it looks like the Russians have stopped, but if you understand Russian army doctrine, they're setting up a forward operating base outside Kyiv to begin artillery strikes, if need be, because the max range of their two S-19 self-propelled artillery tank is 24 kilometers, and 20 kilometers max range for the majority of their multiple rocket launch systems. We see this is exactly how far away they've stopped outside of the city as they're setting up their headquarters to launch their attacks from. They are softening the defenses with artillery, and this is supported by our live map, which for the first time in 6 days, the majority of the reports from Kyiv and the other cities, it's all about incoming artillery and rocket fire.
That doesn't mean we can't get lucky every once in a while. Like, the enemy forgot to put the handbrake on this artillery vehicle and it goes rolling down the hill into the tree. Ivan casually walking over there like he doesn't give a fuck.
In the first few days of the invasion, the Russian army appeared to be holding back their full air force. They holded back on their full rocket artillery power. There was no shock and awe campaign like many of you might remember in the US-run invasion of Iraq, where we softened the targets and we caused many Iraqi units to surrender before even fighting. Russia appears to want to cause as little damage as possible. In the beginning, when the Ukrainian armed forces proved very formidable in their defenses, the Russian army has now begun to change their tactics and lay siege with a more destructive kind of warfare with weapons like the thermobaric warhead. There's some evidence for this in the way that they coordinated their attack. This could likely be a miscalculation due to the Russian army military generals being reluctant to tell Putin the reality of the situation on the ground that they're going into. No one wants to bring the bad news to the big bear. The other possibility is Putin knew how bad it would be on the ground, but he felt that the alternative of not going in would be worse for him. I conducted some meme warfare myself yesterday on my Instagram, pointing out how Putin is acting like the Tinder swindler, scamming just about everybody from Belarus to Chechnya, asking them to send more tanks. After teasing us for 6 long days of the Belarus army giving us tactical blue balls, they officially decided to join the fight to back up Russian. You might remember the Belarus president from such incidents as when he grounded a civilian plane that was flying over his country's airspace so that he could arrest a journalist on there who was critical of him. This is the same guy that was quoted as saying, "I am the last dictator in Europe." The Belarus president appeared to be giving away future plans for them to be attacking neighboring countries of Moldova after this in a televised appearance. Oh yeah, excuse me, brilliant Supreme Leader? Shouldn't we avoid giving away our attack plans? And shouldn't we supply our troops with enough food and water? Oh, and why are we looking at a printout of a map? I'm pretty sure I saw a laptop laying around here somewhere and a projector. Couldn't we use that? It's clear the Russians have pulled out of the cities, they're encircling them, and they're now using the tactics of artillery strikes. It will become a war of attrition, slowly grinding the enemy away to the point of giving up. Unfortunately, the Russians understand this type of warfare well. In Kiev and Konotop, they're applying an old Soviet Red Army tactic of encirclement, and this actually helped them win World War II against Germany. Once Kiev is encircled, it'll be cut off from receiving additional NATO supplies and weapons. At that point, the realities on the ground will change very quickly. The Russian army has now committed 80% of their roughly 170,000 total troops that were stationed on the Ukrainian border, after an initial embarrassing failure from Russian special operations attempting to take Hostomel airfield just outside Kiev. Here we see Chechnyan soldiers replace the Ukrainian flag at the airfield with a Russian one. They have now secured this key airfield, and 200 Ukrainian soldiers were KIA attempting to defend it. This will allow Russia to airlift their higher quality troops directly to the front without having to worry about the complicated, difficult, and costly logistics of coming in from Belarus. Capturing of airfields and then flying in reinforcements was key to the US invasion of Iraq as well. Troops arriving at this airport will be more fresh, and they will not have gone through the exhausting 200-kilometer trek. There is something that I want everyone to keep in mind as we manage our expectations here. In the West, we're seeing a lot of propaganda on social media from Ukraine. In many instances, it's true propaganda. So for instance, videos of Russian columns of tanks getting destroyed are real, and the Russians are taking heavier losses than expected. But we have to remember, we have to temper our expectations, because we're not seeing Russian soldiers uploading videos of destroyed Ukrainian tanks and their victories. I believe people are expecting a fast Russian retreat, and they have a skewed view of the war right now. Believe me, I want that to be the case, but it's wishful thinking at this point. The real scary part for the Russian army at this point is the evidence of how difficult any occupation attempt would be if they attempted to stay in Ukraine. In eastern Ukraine, we're looking at the live map and we can see a Russian brigade attempted to go into the city, and once they met resistance, they left. To the media, this appears to be a retreat, but really these Russians are following their military doctrine and they're encircling the town instead, which is a classic Soviet Red Army move. Once the troops left, they actually had a soldier go in holding 2 live hand grenades to negotiate a surrender of the Ukrainian armed forces. He was holding these hand grenades above his head with the pins probably pulled just in case somebody tried to take him out on the way to the negotiations. The Ukrainian mayor told him to fuck right off, so he left those grenades held up high so he could get out of the town. Someone's been watching too much of the Joker. Yesterday, looking at the live map, we can see in the south of the country near Crimea, the Russian attack plans, their entire invasion plans, fell into Ukraine's hands. The documents were captured by the 810th Brigade of the Battalion Tactical Group of Russia's Black Sea Fleet, their Marines. It was likely taken off a captured high-ranking officer. The plan was from January 18th, and it appears to say that the Russian army expected their initial invasion to take about 15 days. So this is actually evidence that according to their own timeline, they are potentially not that far behind their own expectations for progress, depending on how long Kiev can hold out. The spreadsheet that we see here looks like a comms plan for changing radio frequencies and call signs for each unit, because you never call anyone by their actual name over the radio net. In this map, we see each of these symbols are a mechanized BTR rifle battalion. The flag is where the material technical battalion is, or where the supply unit is, headquarters. The Russian army sets up a headquarters just outside their enemy's defenses. They push supplies from headquarters down to the subunits on the offense. These red lines here, these arches, they indicate where the subunits line up and assemble for attack, and then where they push through. This line up here, it indicates where the objective is for the battalion. There we saw what happens when Russian troops run out of supplies and decide to start looking into local Ukrainian stores. There's even a video of them robbing a bank and looting stores using shopping carts. They look like amateur airsoft teams going shopping after a good match. One user pointed out how they took a long break from doing war crimes so they could have time to do regular old crimes.
Truly horrifying part about this is that it means that the Russian army is engaging in scorched earth warfare.
And this brings me to something important. One person commented on the last video pointing out, how could I joke about war? How can I make light of these situations? Is it because I'm desensitized from having been to war myself? Am I some kind of heartless asshole who likes war? First of all, you're right to ask me that. It's a reasonable question. Why am I making jokes on this sensitive topic? I promise you, behind every joke is anger and disbelief that this was even allowed to happen. I know myself, and if I don't laugh every now and again, the fear and the pain will get me to a point where I'm paralyzed by it. I won't be productive. I won't make videos trying to make sense of this catastrophe. I'll sit in my room and I'll drink. And I don't do that anymore. And that's why I make jokes about the absurdity of war. Only about 5% of my jokes are gonna be funny anyway.
I think a lot of people don't understand why the Russian forces in the Donbass region in the east haven't moved forward. Why haven't they overrun the enemy there yet?
And this is the region where analysts say it's most friendly to Russia, so they should hypothetically be making an easy pass through there. The theory is that Russia is pinning the Ukrainian army down, holding them in place. These Ukrainian forces located here are called the rearguard action. Rearguard means that they're defending the capital of Kyiv from being encircled from the south. Kherson is the first major city on the way from Crimea up to the north. Let's take a look and see how things are going on the ground there. Okay, the Russian soldier really hates that door. Is a techno house an electronics store or a dance club? Right after that, he actually realized that the door was unlocked the whole time. But my poor taste in jokes about the Russian army aside, the assault on Kherson is not going as planned. The Russian army only a few hours ago just released some initial figures, admitting what their losses have been so far. They claim to have lost 498 servicemen and nearly 1,600 have been wounded. The Russian Ministry of Defense, their estimates of the Ukrainian losses are that the Ukrainians have lost 2,870 soldiers KIA, 3,700 wounded, and the Russians claim to have captured 572 Ukrainian servicemen. The Ukrainian armed forces claim to have taken out over 5,700 Russian soldiers. They claim 200 Russians have been captured, 29 planes destroyed, 198 tanks destroyed, 846 armored personnel carriers destroyed. And that might sound like a lot, but when you look at the estimates of the amount of tanks and soldiers that Russian military brought to the fight, it's barely anything.
It's likely that both sides are lying a little bit about the casualty figures. We won't know for sure for a long time.
But I understand that we can't get swept up in emotion. The news is reporting Putin is a madman, he's deranged, and I understand why.
But the truth is he's much worse than that.
These are the same people that force us to take vodka off the shelves because they're afraid. Stoli had to apologize and say, oh, we're actually not imported from Russia. And those are the type of people that they don't know how else to help. So that little bit makes them feel like they have control again in the world, where we clearly do not. I remember we did something very similar in Iraq when we called French fries freedom fries because France wouldn't help us with their military. Listen, at the lowest levels of fighting, your average infantryman on both sides, it's almost a necessity for your own sanity and survival to turn off your critical thinking, to switch it off, and to reduce the enemy to they're just insane. Troops on both sides oftentimes have to view the enemy as having no valid reason for war. But when we zoom out to the level of analysis that involves military generals, officers, then finally geopolitics at that point becomes extremely important to truly understand the enemy in order to never underestimate them. That is what wargaming is at its heart. And that's what makes a good general. They attempt to hold two conflicting ideas in their head at the same time. They need to understand how their own forces operate, but they also need to be able to switch and understand the enemy's position, their logic, their rationale, because then you can more accurately predict the enemy's movements. Writing the enemy off as a madman does not help with that. When I was a lowly 19-year-old PFC in Iraq, I turned to my best friend Colin, and I said the enemy was a bunch of cowards for planting landmines and doing hit-and-run tactics. He told me something I'll never forget. He said the insurgents are not cowards, they're smart. They're fighting with us the only way that they can. They're trying to exploit our weaknesses. If they stood toe-to-toe to us, we'd destroy them. I sat there stunned. And then he said, are we cowards for dropping bombs on them from 30,000 feet high where they can't even see it coming? And that opened my eyes up. You can't underestimate the enemy.
Military force that you definitely don't want to underestimate is the Chechens.
The Chechen forces have joined the fight on the other side, with the Russians sending 10,000 soldiers as we see in this video. The head of the Chechen Republic, Kadyrov, said, as of today, as of this minute, we do not have one single casualty or wounded. Not a single man has even a runny nose. The President Putin took the right decision, and we will carry out his orders under any circumstances. You heard the man, no boo-boos in the Chechen army. When I was in Iraq, there were Chechen soldiers that were fighting with the insurgents against us. At the time, the Russian military and the Chechens denied being involved, so it's great to see that we've finally taken off our masks, stopped pretending like we're not arming the opposite side with money and weapons to kill each other. Gone are the days where we had any class with our proxy wars. In the Cold War, the Russians and the US would secretly arm opposing forces. Now it's out in the open. In a way, I kind of feel like this conflict was inevitable. The Baltic state countries near Russia, like Latvia and Estonia, they naturally want to join NATO as protection against Russia expanding and trying to take them back, because it would be awful for them economically and socially to be under Russian rule. But Russia, on the other hand, they can't allow what they perceive to be NATO expansion with those countries joining NATO right up to their doorstep. And NATO does have a history of overthrowing authoritarian rulers. Whether we would actually do that or not doesn't matter, because this is the Russian perspective and we have to understand what we're up against. For me, this is like when an unstoppable force hits an unbreakable wall. Or maybe not, maybe I'm wrong, I've been wrong before and I'll be wrong again. I'm just an old former average infantryman in my sweatpants, trying to make sense of what's happening here in this tragedy and trying to laugh through my tears. If you have a different point of view, please share it with me. If you're interested in learning more about Russian ground forces equipment, I've created a lot of videos in the past covering them. Please click this playlist and check it out. Like this video and subscribe if you want to see more of this analysis.